Mr. Hughes, what would you describe as the highlights of this past year in the industry, and how do you think they influenced the marine insurance market?
Well, good morning, Marcos. Thank you very much indeed for the interview. It's very nice to see you again here. We had our presentation for local market yesterday, which I think was a success. We had a lot of people that attended it, and it was nice to be able to tell people a bit about what the American Club has been up to in recent months. To go back to your question, I don't think there's anything very specific that I can point to in terms of a particular highlight of the last year or so since we last spoke. I think the clubs have been consolidating their service positions, and obviously as the fleet has grown, more tonnage has come into the market. It's newer tonnage by and large. I think the challenges of low rating and the lack of pricing power continue. I think these are themes that have been evident in the market now for several years, in fact, particularly against a difficult freight earnings scene. So I don't think necessarily there's been anything that I can point to as being very specific. I think it's really business as usual over the last 12 months as a major theme.
And how did the year go in the particular for the American Club?
We've had a good year, I think. A lot of the trends that have been seen elsewhere in the market inevitably affected us as well. Our claims for the last 12 months, or at least for that part of the 2014 policy year, which has matured to date, have been within our expectations. Pool claims have been relatively benign so far. The pool, of course, can be very volatile, as it has been in more recent years, but I think that circumstances at the moment are quite good. Certainly the last 2 years have been better than 2011 and 2012. Our investment performance has held up, I'm pleased to say. As at the end of November, our portfolio had generated 4.3%, by comparison with about 5% the year before, where there was, of course, a significant gain in the stock market, in the US in particular. We continue to advance in terms of our service capabilities. We added new personnel to the office we opened in Hong Kong last year. We think that this will continue to give us a good footprint in that market. And overall, things have been developing well, I think. The underlying problem, of course, and I think all clubs will point to this as an issue, is what I described earlier as a lack of pricing power, getting rates to the level that they ought to be. And in fact, if you look at the trends of the last few years, the average rate per ton across the group as a whole has fallen, I think, in the last 4 or 5 years by about 16%, whereas attritional claims have risen by about 7 or 8% over the same period. And that is largely due, I think, to the churn effect, where newer, lower-rated tonnage comes into the market, having a depressing effect upon rates overall, by comparison with older ships that are scrapped or sold on, or typically scrapped, that had higher rates. So challenges remain, but overall I think that, like other clubs, we've seen a stable last 12 months.
And what is the American Club's approach with respect to the strict environmental regulation of specifically for the USA ports?
We're very conscious of the fact that the United States represents a difficult landscape to ship owners in terms of regulatory requirements, including, of course, environmental requirements. Obviously, it is vitally necessary for ship owners trading within US waters to fulfill their obligations under those environmental laws. And we try to assist owners in that respect. In fact, only recently we produced a document called Welcome to the USA, which wasn't actually a Broadway song, but it was a document that set out in an easily digestible form the various regulations that apply to, among others, environmental issues when vessels come to visit US ports, and that, I think, was very well received. It is a somewhat perplexing landscape. Necessarily, owners must fulfill their obligations within that regime, and we, as the American Club, do everything we can to help in our own backyard, necessarily, of course.
And where and how do you believe the P&I renewals will go this coming February? Will it reflect and respond to the difficult market?
Well, perhaps I can answer the second part of that question first. Because the clubs are mutuals, they necessarily respond to the state of the freight markets, because, of course, the direction of the clubs and the policy that is set by boards of directors very much is made by ship owners themselves, and to that extent the thinking that goes into those policy decisions reflects ship owners' own experiences. So in that sense, P&I clubs are highly responsive to the needs of their ship owner members. I think you will have seen that the requirements in terms of general increases for the 2015 policy year, that will shortly be upon us, have been relatively modest across the board. I think the highest increase was 6.5%, and some clubs have gone for 0%. We went for 4.5%, which is somewhere in the middle there. And I think that in itself was, by comparison with last year's figures, which were rather higher for the 2014 policy year, a reflection of the responsiveness to poor freight earnings and the difficulties that ship owners face in these circumstances, and which, as I say, is a hallmark of mutuality. So I think the renewal will, in reflection of that, nonetheless be a tough one. They always are, but we're ready for the challenges. No doubt our colleagues in the international group are in their individual cases.
There has been some recent debate about the yearly continuous general increase, yet statistics shown by clubs evidence that the actual rates do not seem to reflect this. How do you explain this apparent anomaly, let's say?
Well, if you compound the apparent general increases that have been applied from year to year by all international group clubs, virtually, over the last 10 years, you come up with a compound increase over that period that is very substantial indeed. And you make the point quite correctly that the actual rates don't necessarily reflect that compound development. I referred earlier to the churn effect, the replacement of older tonnage by newer tonnage that attracts much lower rates, typically, than the vessels that are being replaced. So I think that has an effect on year-to-year actual increases as rates per ton over time. That's an important effect. Competition necessarily has an important effect too, when for certain vessels there is a great deal of competition naturally, as between the clubs, and that has a depressing effect upon rates. And I think, as most clubs will say, sometimes their targets for individual yearly increases are not quite met. So that will have an influence too. Also, which is an important point actually, sometimes owners will, in consideration of having a lower renewal rate, take a higher deductible for certain types of claims. And that, in terms of cash increases, will have something of a depressing effect by comparison with the apparent annual compound increase as over time. So there are many factors involved in that, but I think the chief one is, in recent years, is the churn effect.
And what is the continuing, with this continuing difficult market, what criteria do you believe a ship owner should use when choosing a P&I club?
Well, that, of course, is very much dependent upon what a particular owner feels are his particular needs in relation to P&I club service, P&I club rating, P&I club profile, and so on. I think in the final analysis it comes down to an owner feeling comfortable with the club with which that owner is involved. That comfort may arise from a regional preference, for example. I mean, some clubs are perhaps more comfortable in dealing with certain parts of the world, and owners from those areas feel more comfortable in that particular club because they feel that there is a specialization, that there is a particular approach, there is a particular understanding of that region in terms of the provision of service in particular. For example, some clubs have a relatively higher proportion of the Greek market as part of their overall entered tonnage. Some clubs have a relatively large proportion of the Asian market, or the US market, or the Northern European market, as the case may be. That obviously is a determining factor. Where do I feel as a ship owner comfortable in terms of the relationship with my club as to its regional expertise? To what extent, as an owner, do I feel that the club in question has a special feeling for the size of fleet that I have? I mean, we tend to regard ourselves as a middle market club where we look at perhaps, smaller to medium-sized fleets or parts of much larger fleets where there's a great deal more added value perhaps that we can give by virtue of our very personalised approach to service, as exemplified here, I think, in our Greek office, which has an extremely good reputation for that locally. And that may be very appealing to a particular owner in a particular part of the world. It's always a very difficult question to answer to that, but that, I think, is at the heart of it.
And as I saw yesterday in your presentation, your fleet increased, of course, and also diversified. Not only bulk carrier, but also included tankers and other size and type of ships.
Yes, indeed. Well, we do have a very diversified fleet now. When I came in the mid-1990s to the American Club, of course, it was overwhelmingly US in terms of its fleet profile and the domicile of the management of those fleets. And it was very much part of our strategy over intervening years to grow the American Club and to make it much more international and more diversified. And I think we've had a degree of success in doing that over time. Our balance of tonnage now, I think, is pretty reflective of the world fleet in general, although I think probably in relation to the vessel type, we are perhaps somewhat heavier in dry bulk and tanker tonnage than the profile of the world fleet at large. But we are nicely balanced, we think, in terms of our diversification between the major areas of maritime activity. Obviously, the North American homeland is still very important to us. Here in Europe, as you will have seen yesterday, we have a very strong position. We have an office in London as well as an office here in Athens. And in Asia, we are strong. About nearly 30% of our total tonnage by management domicile comes from the Asian region, both North Asia and Southeast Asia. So we're nicely balanced between these three major areas of business, and we'll continue to have our focus on those regions.
Can you give us information about the makeup of your global membership? We say something, and also in Greece particular, how do you service the Greek market membership?
Well, as I said a moment ago, our tonnage is made up of a diverse regional profile, I think. We have about 50%, or just over 50% of the total tonnage by management domicile from Europe, Middle East and Africa, predominantly Europe, and within that context, predominantly Greece. About 30% comes from Asia. We're very strong in China, where we have offices in both Shanghai and Hong Kong. We have a growing book from Southeast Asia, notably Indonesia, some from the Philippines, some from Asia and Bangladesh. And the balance in tonnage terms tends to be North American. A large part of that is tug and barge business, mainly coastal business, green water business as it's sometimes described, but also increasingly other kinds of, we have a passenger fleet involvement down in Florida and other parts of the States, which is doing well. and the rest of the business comes from other parts of the world, mainly Australasia and Central and South America. So it's pretty balanced. And in premium terms, in terms of the derivation of the premium into the club, it's pretty equal between the three major regions, Asia, North America, and Europe, effectively.
How and where do you see the fixed premium P&I market fitting in as compared to the mutual IG?
That's a very interesting question, in fact, and it's becoming increasingly topical as an issue. We take the view that there is a place for both mutuality and fixed premium in the larger universe of the provision of P&I insurance and P&I services. The mutual sector, notably that catered to by the international group of P&I clubs, the 13 mutuals, of which the American club obviously is one, that shares pooling arrangements and reinsurance and so on, and cooperates very greatly together, is between 90 and 95% of world shipping. And that's overwhelmingly international blue water, globally trading tonnage. That, I think, will always be a constituency that will lend itself mainly to mutuality, and I think that is going to remain as the overwhelmingly dominant part of the global shipping industry, or the provision of P&I to the global shipping industry. However, there is a significant non-mutual sector, probably in the order in premium terms of, well, it will account basically for the remaining 10% or thereabouts, 5 to 10% of the world ship owners, but it's about, we reckon it's about $400 million in outside the United States in non-US fixed premium, pure fixed premium business. And this sector is for the most part made up of small operators of smaller vessels in local and regional trades who do not necessarily wish to have the very high limits of liability that are offered by the clubs, quite correctly, given the exposures that larger ships trading internationally can bring, nor wish to be subject to the obligations of mutuality, particularly the possibility of supplementary calls and so on. That is a sector that has traditionally been catered to by commercial insurers, of which there are a growing number, but is a sector too where a number of mutual clubs, including the American club, are becoming increasingly interested because there is a need for that degree of gold standard service in that sector, just as much as there is in the mutual sector. In the case of the American club, we have set up a facility in conjunction with Lloyd's underwriters called Eagle Ocean Marine. It's been running now for the last 3.5 years. It has done very well. You will remember that I made reference to it during the presentation yesterday, and it has had a nice but very prudent cumulative growth in premium, and the claims have been performing in accordance with expectations. It has added profitability to the American club's mutual book over the period, and that has definitely, I think, a place in the future of P&I provision at large, and I think you'll see to a modest degree in the final analysis, and not in a way that affects the fundamentality of mutuality. I think you will see growing interest among the mutuals in perhaps taking a part of that sector. We are a part of it and we see opportunity there. But it's got to be done on the right terms. You can't get into that business on a fixed premium basis without being very sensible, prudent, and responsible in terms of your pricing and general approach to that business, as we have been at Eagle Ocean Marine. But I think there's a place for both, in short. Well, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be interviewed, actually, Marcos, and to tell you a bit more about what we've been up to, particularly through the medium of Maritimes TV, which is very good, and I much enjoy it, incidentally. I think it is an excellent service to the Greek and international shipping community. Whenever I see it appearing on my email, I always have a look and see what's a wonderful opportunity. Indeed, yes, indeed. And you cover a great deal more than just the P&I clubs generally, or marine insurance, or what have you. I just want to say that the American club continues to go from strength to strength. We are very proud of our engagement with the shipping community here in Greece. It is certainly one of the most important jewels in our crown. We believe we have unparalleled levels of service that's provided by our office here. It's a very important part of the overall position that we have across the global industry. Greece is the largest shipping country in the world. We are very conscious of that, and it continues to go forward with great vigour and energy. And I cannot see it being seriously challenged, in that particular regard, by anyone for some considerable period of time. It's always a pleasure to come here to Greece, to meet friends, old friends, see what's going on, hear what's going on, have the opportunity of telling what's friends and other interested parties what's going on at the American Club, and generally participate in what is a very, very dynamic market, and which will remain a dynamic market for many years to come, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kit.
Thank you, Marcos. A pleasure.